Welcome to Garden Success with Skip Richter, the show designed to help you have a bountiful garden and a beautiful landscape. Call in now with your lawn and garden questions at 979-845-5689 or email your questions to gardensuccess@tamu.edu. And now, Texas A&M AgriLife Extension horticulturist Skip Richter.
Well, hello and welcome to Garden Success. We are glad you're listening today, and we've got a special show for you. First of all, we're coming to you by tape. So while we're normally a call-in show, don't try to call in today. Next week, perhaps, we can try this again. Let's see. We are fortunate today to have a friend of mine, Tim Hartmann, Dr. Tim Hartmann, who is assistant professor and extension fruit specialist with Texas AgriLife Extension. Tim, welcome. Glad to have you.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
Yeah, it's always a good opportunity to pick your brain. Folks, this guy, he knows more about fruit, or he's forgotten more about fruit than I know. So we're going to take advantage of that here today. So, Tim, I thought this would be a good time to talk about really all things fruit. I hope to pick your brain on some of the fruits that maybe aren't so common or familiar to folks. And maybe get some tips on getting through this incredible heat and drought again. And so why don't I just turn it loose for you to talk a little bit about, talk to folks that have some fruit trees in the yard. What are some things they can do to help? Just any kind of advice you can give for this blazing hot, dry time of the year.
Yeah, it is definitely a rough time out there right now, horticulturally speaking, and tough for humans too to be out there. I was out in the field all morning, actually, at our research plot down in the Brazos River bottom. But yeah, right now, I mean, we're just trying to keep our stuff alive, especially here in the Brazos Valley with these temperatures. So of course, just a few tips I would give is just make sure you're watering, not overwatering, especially with a clay soil. It's really easy this time of year to actually overwater. Phytophthora root rot is really common when it's hot. Trees are stressed. And so really what you want to do is try to water deeply and do that out near the drip line, not against the trunk. When you water right against the trunk, that's when you're going to have problems. And I do want to offer a caveat, and that is, of course, if you have a tree that you just planted this spring, you got to remember that it's still going to have roots that are confined to that small area. But we're talking on larger trees. Yeah, you want to water, get it out near the drip line where those fine feeder roots are going to be.
So on a tree that was planted, well, it would be fortunate if they're planted last fall in terms of the time they have to get some roots down. But let's say in the winter or spring, I would think we might even be looking at maybe every other day in a very small amount, just taking care of the root ball and maybe a little bit of the soil around it. Or is that too much? Do you think twice a week by now is okay? Or?
I would think twice a week probably, especially if you've got some mulch there. Of course, it obviously it varies. If you're on sand, you're going to have to water more frequently. But I know I put in some peaches, about a dozen out in western Brazos County where I live, on 3 feet of sand, and I'm just watering those twice a week now, and they're putting on new growth.
Good. Okay, good. Well, it's huge to keep the weeds away too, and the St. Augustine is a weed.
Yes,
when it
turf is a weed. Yeah, amen. Thank you.
So, I usually tell people, let's mulch it all the way out to the outer branch spread. Aesthetically, in a landscape, that's not always acceptable to people, but if you ask the tree, it would say absolutely, if not more.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
To give that mulch,
especially on a young tree too. Yeah,
I've mentioned this on the air before. I'm kind of wandering off the topic here, but it is fruit and nuts, so we'll keep going. Years ago, there was a pecan orchard planted, and it was a Bermuda field, and half of it they completely killed the Bermuda. The other half they left it and kept it mowed, and they planted pecan trees. And 5 years later, I think it was Dr. McEachern probably took a picture, and the difference between a pecan tree growing with no competition and a pecan tree competing with Bermuda grass, it was like 3 times difference in 5 years. I mean, it was huge.
Yeah.
And I wish I had that picture now, because I could show it to people and say, this is why forest floor environment all around that tree. Get some compost. And
perfect teaching tool. Yeah, absolutely.
It is. A picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, you mentioned not overwatering, and people think about, well, if it's so hot, I just have to water. But what we're really trying to do is keep the soil moist, because when you put roots in an anaerobic situation and the demands are through the roof and the roots can't respire, I mean, you can kill a plant faster that way than faster than by drought.
Yes.
Yeah, so don't overdo it.
Yes.
That's good advice. That is real good advice. And our fruit trees, the spring blooming fruit trees that we have, they're setting their fruit buds last month and this month primarily, I think is what you were telling me, for next year, right?
Yeah, especially stone fruit. It kind of varies with some of the other crops. Of course, we have things like strawberries, for example, that are a little bit different. Figs that can produce on new wood and everything. But yeah, most of them produce on this year's growth. So in other words, what you see growing right now this year, making new growth in 2023, with new growth leaves on it, that will make your fruit in 2024. And so, yeah, I know for peaches, usually we say July, August, maybe a little bit into early September, but really July and August.
Yeah.
So, and really, I'm glad you mentioned that, because going back to watering, you think about doubles or blind nodes where we don't have good active buds, viable buds on peaches.
You're talking about a branch that there's leaves here and then there's a space and then there's some leaves?
Yeah, or in the wintertime when it comes to pruning, you may have had leaves all along there, but you won't have buds actually there.
I see.
And that's actually a problem we see due to heat, but also water stress.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And I know on some varieties, like I believe, like June Gold tends to have a tip, and I think the tips may be a little more prominent when they go through trouble like this.
Yes.
On some varieties, yeah.
Yeah, they tend to be real apically dominant.
Okay.
So another reason, especially as you're getting that growth right now, you want it to be, you want the tree to be as happy as possible.
Yeah.
Because again, you're making those flower buds for next year.
Well, I know a lot of people that have peach trees around here are looking out the window and seeing something that is not growing. The leaves are kind of chartreuse colored rather than healthy green, and there's no fresh new growth, and they're really struggling along. So, well, that's good advice. When you think about the most, I guess, familiar common fruit, we think about things like peaches and plums and apples and pears. Those are kind of, for us, the real big deals. I've kind of given up on apples for this area. I know we have varieties that'll grow. We have varieties that'll produce some. But it just seems like we've stretched the apples so far south that our options are way more limited than they would be much farther north in Texas than here.
Yeah, you've got the chilling issue, but we just have a lot of disease issues too. Of course, people want to point out, cotton root rot, but not all areas in Texas have cotton root rot.
Right.
East Texas, obviously.
We have oak root rot in East Texas.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. Yeah, so armillaria is going to be a problem anywhere. But really, in my opinion, it's more the disease issue. Bacterial, fungal canker, and then you've got bitter rot is a big problem. Bitter rot is, if you're not familiar, that's kind of like your brown rot on peach. It's that big of a problem, and just something you have to spray for.
Yeah, it's a challenge to grow apples and even peaches organically, because the arsenal is very limited in your options, and so you have to go after it. Well, I'd like to hear a little bit about some of the research you guys are doing. I've been excited over the last 2 or 3 years just hearing about all the kinds of fruit that you're really taking a deep dive into to find out, will they grow here? If so, are there some new varieties we need to be looking at? And I think one of them is apricots. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what's going on with apricots?
Yeah, I'm kind of a glutton for punishment.
No, so, you're a brave vanguard out there.
Well, they always say there's a fine line between bravery and something else, but sometimes I feel like I tread it. But anyway, yeah, I like working with, kind of pushing the envelope and, trying to test some of these new prospective fruit crops. But so apricot, yeah, that's something that we're really doing a lot of work with. And apricot is a crop that historically has not done very well for us. We can grow the trees, but they just fail to produce a crop consistently. So you may get a good crop, 1 year, and then you may go, 5-10 years before you have another bumper crop with light crops in between, and even some years where you have zero fruit.
And is that a chilling thing, or what's been the problem traditionally with the standard apricots?
So based on the scientific literature, it seems like it's more bud hardiness. And so those buds, anywhere from early swell, going from dormancy all the way up until bloom, and even shortly after as they're setting fruit, these buds, the embryos in the fruit, the young fruit, are very sensitive to temperature swings.
Okay.
And even some of the literature would suggest that it's not even freezing temperatures like would cause crop loss in peach. Even temperatures in the mid 30s, in conjunction with these going way up into the 80s or upper 70s. It's just really, really hard on these.
That's what we do here.
Exactly. Yeah, we're a roller coaster.
Yeah, we are a roller coaster.
And so they really like a nice, consistent climate like California or Mediterranean or something like that.
Okay. Well, you guys are trying some new ones. I think you have quite a few, right?
Yeah, so we have, I want to say right now it's around 150 different varieties.
Okay, but let me pause, folks. Did you hear that? 150. I didn't even know there were 50 different apricot varieties. All right, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, so I just, my idea is, we want to, from a genetics perspective, we want to cast that net wide. You think about, you look at like grapes, the history of grapes in Texas. If they would have started out, if everyone would have started out with, say, Chardonnay, for example, and it didn't work because of Pierce's disease and too hot of a climate, other diseases, they say forget it, we wouldn't have any grapes in Texas. But they kept looking at other varieties. And so we're kind of looking at the same approach here with apricot. But basically what I did is I requested budwood of everything that the repository in Davis, California had that was a variety, or cultivar, more correctly. If it was some wild type or breeding material, I said no, had to draw the line somewhere. And then anyone that I could get from a nursery that we haven't really looked at in Texas, I would buy a tree, get budwood off of it, and we're going to be, once these trees are finished, we're budding and growing these. They'll be planted out at about 4 locations around the state.
Good. That's good. Good information. Yeah, and that's a lot. It's a lot of cultivars.
Yeah, the hope is that some of these, we have ones like, and I'm going to butcher this, but Poznat Svetushti from Ukraine.
You can say whatever you want, and we'll just assume it's right, because no one stands here to correct you except perhaps some Ukrainian listeners.
Well, one of my favorite ones is Karma Tush, but the idea is, hey, good chance that some of these will be better adapted than the 5 or 6 that we're typically growing in Texas.
Yeah, what do we got? Blenheim, and what are some of the other common?
Tisdale, Moore Park, ones like that are pretty. Bryan is another common one, and so yeah.
Okay.
We're also cool. The other thing we're doing is we're trialing these under high tunnel greenhouses too.
Oh.
We actually have a grower, very innovative grower, Russ Duda Baker out in Gillespie County, who has several trees under high tunnel where they're just kind of take the edge off that cold in the spring. And he's had, I think, 3 consecutive, I don't want to jinx them, but 3 consecutive good crops of Blenheim apricot.
Okay. Because of the high tunnel.
Because of the high tunnel, yeah.
Because of that temperature fluctuation thing?
Yeah, you're kind of, if you look at someone's EKG after they just ran a marathon, it's kind of like if you, those lower dips, if you could kind of curb those just a little bit where you're not going as low, just taking the edge off of some, kind of buffer it a little bit.
Okay. Wow, that's interesting. I think of an apricot as a pretty big tree. So you can fit them in a high tunnel. I guess you just have to prune them.
Yeah, a little different training system. Yeah, definitely high density.
Okay. Well, cool. That apricots is good. You've done a lot with figs too. Right now the standard for us is Alma here. And I've seen good success in this part of Texas with LSU Gold, LSU Purple figs. Then we've got Celeste, which is a good one. But you guys are looking at some figs too. Tell me about that project.
Yeah, well, first thing I want to say is I haven't done that much personally with figs.
Okay.
I don't want to take credit that's undeserved.
I'm asking you the question for the department.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So basically we're taking stuff that I know Jim Comas out in Fredericksburg, he's done a lot of work with figs, evaluating them. my friend Dr. Dave Creech at SFA, he has a collection of, I want to say, over 70 different varieties.
Of course he does.
Yeah, he loves collecting stuff too, like postage stamps, I think is what the phrase he uses. But anyway, I've propagated his collection, and then we've gotten some new stuff in from the repository, the USDA repository in California, and so we may be around 100 or so. Of course, there are many more out there.
Yeah.
But one of the things we're really doing right now that we're really interested in is testing a select. We've got about 12 varieties that we're gonna test under simulated freeze stress.
Okay.
So basically, the idea is to take, we install planting. Half of the plants we actually cut to the ground. We let them get established for a few years, but we cut them to the ground every winter after that. So we're simulating a Winter Storm Uri 2021 kind of hard freeze. And we know that some of these varieties, LSU Purple, Brown Turkey, reportedly Magnolia also, are able to grow back and produce a good crop on that, very precociously on that new wood. Whereas you do that to a Celeste, and usually you're not going to get anything for a couple years at least.
What I guess we call that a Breba crop, or what is the Breba crop on figs?
So the Breba or Breba crop, and I feel like I haven't really seen that many of them here, but that would be what's on the old wood, and so you actually have some buds that are already there, even some really tiny fruit, and those carry through the winter in a mild climate.
So you get an early crop out of them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then what they call the main crop, that's produced on the new growth.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. That's good. Yeah, figs are an easy one. The Gulf Coast used to have a huge fig industry down in the Blacklands that is now rice country in a lot of those areas.
Yeah, I want to say like south of Houston, I believe it was Galveston County, somewhere around 16,000 acres, I believe.
Lots and lots of figs.
Mostly magnolias, but they were growing.
And I think a freeze in the 50s maybe kind of put it in, or a series of freezes put an end to that, I believe.
Yeah, and I think already around 1900 they had a bad one too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Whoa. Well, maybe well before the 50s then. Well, figs are fun. They're easy to grow. They have a couple of challenges. Nematodes are a problem with them. So if you have sandy soil, you might be dealing with that. But also if those of you who are listening who might be interested in planting a fig, one of the key things we look for in a variety is, does the eye open, or is the eye closed, or is there a drop of resin in it? Because if the eye's opened, it's just going to become a fermented little wasp beer joint on the tree, and it'll be sour and nasty.
Pickled figs,
Yeah, so we look for that. It seems like magnolia may be an open eye. I don't know. It's not an expert on figs by any means.
I believe it is. I'd have to go back and look at it.
Yeah.
But Celeste definitely is not.
Yeah.
And of course, like you're talking about, Alma produces that resin that seals it off.
Yeah, cool. That is nice. So when it comes to figs, another challenge we have is the rust fungus. Figs just don't have a lot of disease issues that are concerning to worry about. But boy, rust will defoliate those things. I had a call the other day. Someone sent me a picture of their figs, and it was just rust all over the leaves. Yeah.
Wow.
Spots all over. I mean, it wasn't fully defoliating, but it was getting started. And
I wonder if they're watering, if it was getting hit by sprinkler irrigation or something.
That's a good question. Yeah. It may well have been.
Yeah, I've even seen in years like 2017, we had Hurricane Harvey. The trees got hit really hard with rust after all of that rain, and then lost their leaves, and then they responded with new growth. Well, they were growing full throttle into late fall, and then they got hurt more by the freeze, actually. So that's kind of another secondary thing that can happen.
That's true. Hey, if you're listening today, which if you hear me, you are, we are coming to you by tape. Normally we're a call-in show, but today we are coming by tape, and we're fortunate to have Dr. Tim Hartmann, who is assistant professor and extension fruit specialist with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension here in College Station in the horticulture department, and we're picking his brain on all kinds of things fruit today. I know, Tim, another one of the crops that I would say is never been like top of the list of popular Texas crops is persimmons. We've always had persimmons, a handful of varieties, 20th century, and what is the gosh, I can't even say the name of the Tamapan. And
I love that. I grew up on Tamapan.
Did you?
Yeah.
There's several common ones.
Eureka.
But I believe you found a persimmon or two to add to the list of things to test, right? Or you or one of the, I should say, someone in the department.
Yeah, we've got a trial we're doing down the Brazos River bottom, and it's kind of just more for fun, observational. But and actually, Dr. Justin Shiner, who's a viticulture specialist, but also an avid fruit guy. This is a project that he and I started on together, collecting, I believe should be somewhere around 70 different varieties of Asian persimmon. So this is Diosporus khaki. So if you grew up in East Texas or kind of the eastern U.S. At large, and you're maybe getting mixed up with those orange native persimmons, those are good. And there actually is a small industry in Kentucky based off of the pulp from that fruit.
Okay.
But these are large fruit. We're talking, I mean, some of these can be, third of a pound or large or very large. They're seedless. They don't have any seed. And there are many non-astringent varieties where basically before they get soft, they actually lose those tannins, those very that makes them really astringent, and you can even eat the skin on them. So they're crunchy like an apple. You can eat the skin and everything.
That's amazing. I worked in Missouri for 3 years, and I used to drive down the country roads and pick the Diosporus virginiana, and just put them on the dash of the pickup in a shoebox that I had, or on the seat of the pickup rather, and just carry them around with me. And when they got totally just becoming a sack of jelly, about to leak all over the place, that was the time to eat them. I've heard that if you put them in a freezer overnight and then take them out, do that once or twice, that it will help break down astringency. Do you know if there's any truth to that?
I've heard that helps them ripen. I don't know about the astringency. I know, I'm trying to remember, there is a treatment. I believe they do it in Italy, I want to say, or was it Spain? But there's a gas they'll actually expose them to that can cause the astringent varieties to lose their astringency.
It's not ethylene, or?
No, it's not ethylene. I'm trying to remember what it is. But anyway.
Well, there you go. Well, I tell you, I understand the interest in the non-astringent, but in my opinion, the astringent types seem to have better flavor as a general group.
I think it's a richer, more complex, just a more intense flavor.
I think we ought to have more persimmons around here. I mean, from a landscape standpoint, what fruit do you have that is ripening in October, in the fall, and it just looks like orange ornaments all over the tree.
Yeah, little orange pumpkins.
A good fall color on the plants, which is hard to come by in Brazos County.
Hot pink and orange leaves.
Yeah, really, really attractive, and I just think they're good. But I like the astringents. I don't like astringency, but I love those astringents. The way I tell people to eat an astringent persimmon is to let it get so ripe and soft that you're afraid it's going to burst in your hand as you carry it. Get in the bathtub and have your significant other hand you the persimmon.
There you go.
And then you can eat it, and then it's dripping off your elbows, and you're just ready to clean up right there.
Sounds like something Dr. Jerry Parsons would say.
Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh!
But no, it's
I'm gonna wake up.
It's absolutely true. Yeah.
Yeah. They're a mess, but oh my gosh, they're a good mess. And persimmon bread, and when it comes to holiday baking, man, they're great. And again, diseases, not a lot of things you need to spray for on persimmons, whether it comes to insects or foliage disease. I've seen leaf spots on them, but it doesn't seem to.
There is a borer. There is a clearwing borer that's closely related to the greater peachtree borer that will attack the Virginiana rootstock. So we graft the Asian species onto the American persimmon because it has very good roots. And that borer will sometimes, on younger trees, it can cause big problems, and then older kind of declining trees, it'll actually bore from the graft union or base all the way down into the taproot. And I've seen them kill some trees.
Wow, that's interesting.
But otherwise, usually not a big deal.
That's good. Well, again, 70 plus cultivars of persimmons. I can't wait till years down the line. That's one thing about doing fruit research is it's not like cotton where you plant it this year and at the end of the year you got your answers as to how it's producing or whatever. It's like you wait a long time to find out whether it's worth having or not.
We'll have lots of persimmons to get rid of too.
With
300 trees.
I can really help you with that. I know somebody who eats persimmons.
That sounds good. We'll take you up on that.
Another not so common but probably somewhat familiar fruit is the pomegranate. And my whole extension career, there was Wonderful, and what was the other one? I can't think of the other variety, but Wonderful was kind of the main one that we talked. Was it Fleischmann? Is that a pomegranate? I think. Anyway.
Not familiar with that one.
Okay. Well, I may be dreaming that one, but there just wasn't a lot of options.
Uh-huh.
But again, the pomology or the fruit group from Extension Horticulture is looking at a lot of things. So talk a little about pomegranates and where we are with that in Texas.
Okay. Yeah. So pomegranate, Dr. Larry Stein out in Uvalde and Jim Comas in Fredericksburg, they collected, I don't know how many it was total, but it was several dozen actually from the repository. Of course, this is a crop that's native to the Middle East, Southern Asia, and they trialed them, and they were looking at cold hardiness. They were looking a lot at some of the soft-seeded varieties like Sambar, ones that are a little more palatable, easier to eat, looking for color. But it turned out the pomegranates, we can grow the plant, but getting good quality fruit has been proven quite difficult.
Especially east of 35 where it rains more so than in a little bit drier climate?
Well, it seems like even, I know Fredericksburg, they had some major problems.
Okay.
And the big, they'll get sun scald. There are some cosmetic, pathogens that afflict the skin. Of course, if I'm a homeowner, I don't care what it looks like as long as it tastes good. It can be as ugly as sin, but if it tastes good.
And if you do have light switches, you can turn off the light and it tastes great. Yeah. You don't have to look at it. There you go.
We're talking about eating fruit. And so anyway,
yeah.
But the one major problem, there is a new fungal pathogen. It's a fungal pathogen that was just several years ago that was identified, and I believe they may have reclassified it, but it was an Alternaria. And basically what it does is you can have an otherwise perfect-looking fruit, but you open it up, and those little juice sacs full of juice and seed that we call arils, they will be half or all of them would be brown and rotten and completely inedible. And the problem is you can't tell unless you open them.
Until you open it.
And I know Dr. Stein had done some work. He had done an efficacy trial with fungicides. They had tried all kinds of things. I don't think they tried bagging the fruit, which, of course, can be used for peaches to keep brown rot and plum curculio off. So that may possibly be an option. But this heart rot, it can wipe out your entire crop.
So it sounds like maybe with pomegranates, we're not really close to having a pomegranate industry here, but maybe for a backyard tree here and there, I don't know, do we even have sprays to fight those kind of diseases, or are we just up a creek?
There really isn't anything labeled for it, to my knowledge, or especially anything that works. But there's some that have shown some promise. Purple Heart, Salavatsky. Salavatsky is a very cold hardy plant. I know all of my pomegranates. I have about 20 different ones at home. They all froze to the ground this past winter, kind of like the crepe myrtles did around here, with that very
unprepared for a freeze.
Yes, exactly. But Salavatsky came through fine. Of course, it does get heart rot. There is one called Austin. It's just a chance seedling. Someone brought it over from the Middle East, and anyway, it's not a nice deep red color, but it's kind of a pinkish white. It's not too exciting, but it's the only one that doesn't appear to really have that heart rot problem.
That's good.
However, it doesn't seem to have that much cold hardiness either. I know for me it breaks bud early and can get frozen back pretty easily. So,
well, that's good news.
We'll keep trying.
One thing about these trials, we're talking about getting out there and trying new things and playing around. And sometimes it's research. Sometimes it's just let's plant and let's watch and learn.
Learn a lot like that.
But the good thing is, even if you determine after a study that doesn't work here and here's why, well, you've saved a lot of folks, because there's always somebody who wants to go put it in an orchard of something.
Yes.
Who, they've heard about this new thing and they want to, that happened with lavender in Texas. That's not an orchard, but We got huge
I'm from
lavender farms.
I'm from the lavender capital of Texas, Blanco.
Blanco, Texas, yeah.
Yeah.
And, even out in Blanco, I've been in some fields where there's huge sections where the rot has killed some plants, and we're just not quite that Mediterranean climate, I guess. But that's not to say no one can grow lavender, because people are doing it. But it does help to know the challenges.
What you're up against, yeah.
Because and I guess I'm talking to people listening, because you know all this and more. But when you invest in a fruit orchard, you're putting a lot of money down up front.
Oh yeah.
And then you're having to wait years with all the input and the care and the expenses for that crop to come in. And I planted a peach orchard one time up in Willis, Texas. It was a small one, but it was going to be a pick your own thing. And it took 3 years to get up to where we'd get a few fruit, and the third year and the fourth year both, it froze and took the crop out.
Wow.
So it's 5 years after I invested in irrigation and soil prep and purchased plants and took care of plants.
You finally started to.
It's kind of it's not a walk in the clouds, as the movie for vineyards says. One thing. This is getting off fruit into nuts, so I guess it's okay too. But I may have told you this before. There used to be a publication, and it was either, I think it was Arkansas, it could have been Kansas, but just not quite pecan country, a little further up there. And there was an official extension publication that talked about planting pecans, and that you talk about investing your money and waiting. Oh my gosh, that's what, 20 years or something before you're... Well, anyway, at the end of the publication, it said, so if you're thinking about putting in a pecan orchard in whatever state this was, it says, I recommend you take your money and go to Las Vegas and stay there until every penny is gone, because at least that way you'll have the memory of a good time.
Oh, wow.
Is that truth? You can't write that stuff anymore.
That's pretty good. I thought you were going to say take your money and burn it or something.
No. It was... there's a lot of truth in that humorous statement, though.
Yeah.
All right, let's...
there's also the journey, too, It's not just the destination. But, when you're taking your money and putting your livelihood at stake on a large scale, it's a totally different thing than just your backyard.
We have a lot of great pecan areas around Texas where it does very well. But whenever you take a crop outside of its best zone... things get a little weird, that it becomes a little more iffy. Pineapple guava. Now, I bet a lot of the listeners don't even know what a pineapple guava is. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that and some of the things you've been looking at and the results you've had, because we've had some doozy freezes to deal with.
Okay, so pineapple guava is, to me, it's a large evergreen shrub, small tree. It can be kind of a multi-trunk small tree, about the size of maybe like a Texas mountain laurel or something like that. Kind of a silvery grayish green foliage. I think they're pretty attractive. Late spring they produce these beautiful pink edible flowers. They're actually edible with very showy red stamens. We use them a lot actually as a green meatball kind of plant, as a evergreen shrub. I know there's some planted just across the road over here near the hotel and conference center. But, of course, as the name would suggest, they do produce fruit. Most of the ones...
It's not a true guava.
Oh, yes. Thanks for that question. I do want to mention that it is not a true guava. It's a distant cousin. But it is a fruit that resembles a guava. It has that persistent calyx, that funny looking thing at the end.
Somewhat like an apple. And on the end.
Yeah, it's got that inferior ovary and everything where it's you have that kind of floral remnant there, and the fruit, if you've never had one, it's interesting. The skin remain green on most cultivars. Cut it open, it'll be anywhere from kind of a greenish, whitish to a kind of a pinkish tan color, depending on the cultivar. Very, very reminiscent of pineapple. Some people say some hints of mint and pear in there, and it's very gritty though, like a tropical guava, like Acidium guajava. Now, I do want to mention that I would be willing to bet every plant that you'd get in a nursery here in Texas is going to be grown from seed. So you don't know what you're getting.
They're from seed.
From
okay.
seed, yeah. Easy from seed. They're highly heterozygous, though, and so that means you don't know what you're going to get. It's like Forrest Gump and box of chocolates. You don't know until you open it up. In other words, you try the fruit. And so to get the varieties that have the really good fruit, we have to clonally propagate those.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And you've been looking at some. About how many have you looked at? And I think they're being looked at, like up at Creech is looking at some. And so how many have you looked at, and what have been the results? Because I think the freezes have
it's definitely been challenging, yeah. So I think we're at around 38 or so different name cultivars here. Dr. Creech and I are working together on we're partners in crime on a grant-funded project, and I do want to mention that most of these projects were made available through a Texas Department of Agriculture specialty crops block grant. Mm-hmm. That has really allowed us to do a lot of what we're doing, including this project. But basically, we're trialing them. We're looking at the fruit. This is a crop that it's late to bloom, late to set, late to ripen, and so they can go to December even, and the fruit will freeze. So one of the things we're looking for is early ripening.
Okay.
So varieties like Apollo, for example, comes off early. I want to say Nikita is a little bit earlier too. So we're looking at that. Obviously, fruit size, bigger is always better.
Yeah.
Flavor, but of course cold hardiness, because this is a crop that I would say it's marginally cold hardy here.
Mm-hmm. The pineapple guavas I've seen that are just that straight runs of seeds, who knows what they are, they're not a lot bigger than your thumb. I mean, they're a little bit, but some of the ones, like if you go to New Zealand where they really go into breeding programs, how big are those?
Some of these things will be, probably 250 grams or something.
Which is like
we're talking. Well, put in perspective.
Are we talking about an egg, maybe a chicken egg?
A very large egg. Okay. I know when I was in New Zealand studying golden kiwi fruit, some of these fruit were actually the size or larger than the golden kiwi fruit, which is already pretty big. Mm-hmm. Now, I would be lying if I didn't tell you that there's definitely an environmental impact too. That's a perfect climate. They are going to achieve larger size fruit there, but there's a genetic component too.
Okay. Now you found that cold hardiness is definitely a factor in our zone here. So can you talk a little bit about that? How hardy are they? Any tips for someone who wanted to try to grow one?
Mm-hmm. So if you look in the literature, they'll be usually rated at about 10 to 15 degrees, and that's maximum cold hardiness. So assuming they're dormant, full-grown plant, mature, they can take that kind of cold. I know in 2021, when we went down to 6 degrees Fahrenheit, I had some pull through that were unprotected. Some of them froze to the ground. Of course, most of these are grafted. So whenever you have a grafted plant that is grafted above ground and it freezes to the ground, you're left with just your rootstock, like many people are seeing with like their Meyer lemons that just have, they're just a trifoliate orange understock now. But we've seen some differences between varieties and even as far as fruit size and flavor too. I had my class taste them and rate them and all that last fall. We had some fruit.
They are actually good. They are good. But that freeze this December, that you referred to it earlier as a problem with the crepe myrtles that weren't ready. It was interesting. It's always interesting when we have an unusual weather event to see how things are affected. We had a super low chill year one year. I mean, really low chill. And I didn't know this, but the Chinese pistache did not leaf out. And that's a shade tree. And I'd never, driving along the golf course on George Bush Avenue here, it was like,
looked like they were dead.
I'd never seen it, but we'd never had that kind of situation, or at least I hadn't noticed it. Well, the pineapple guava it can be a challenge, and I know that it's very difficult to root from cuttings, and you and I have talked about that. We have a mutual friend down, I think, El Campo area, kind of that direction, who is an expert on propagating, and he is still trying to figure it out, trying to find the secret sauce to root them. Because like you said, if you do a seedling, well, then it's, whose kids are identical to mom or dad?
Exactly.
They never are, unless they misbehave, and I found that that's usually pointed toward being identical to dad on that in my house. So seriously though, so if we can't root cutting, you can do the grafting, but that makes for a more expensive plant, and then you have the issue, as you said, with cold hardiness. Yeah, but it is kind of cool. People are into things in their landscapes that wouldn't fly at all commercially, but in a home landscape, I mean, my gosh,
a little more latitude there.
If you want to see someone grow something, tell them they can't.
Exactly. Nothing more empowering.
They'll have an air conditioner out there around a glass house, proving that Skip was wrong, that Colorado blue spruce won't grow here. So, but the pineapple guava, I have hopes for that one. I think in time we're going to see it, and because like the persimmon, it would be a great ornamentable. It would be a great edible landscaping kind of plant.
Pretty low input too. It doesn't really have a lot of disease or pest issues either.
Even the bark, the way the bark exfoliates, if you prune it into a mini tree, I think it's really attractive. So.
Very flaky bark. Yeah. And I do have a master's student who right now is doing most of her thesis work on trying to improve cutting efficiency, because you can get a few cuttings to root, but it's nowhere near commercially feasible for a commercial nursery operation. So we're trying some different things, some kind of thinking outside of the box techniques, and she just stuck the cuttings a couple weeks ago, so stay tuned. We'll see what we find.
There you go. Well, earlier you were talking about apricots and about the fluctuations in temperature, like in spring, that they have to go through. We also have that weird fluctuations as we go into fall, and that's what caught our crepe myrtles unprepared last year, and pineapple guavas. And so it is a challenge finding things that grow here that with that kind of environment we have.
Yeah, we're consistently inconsistent, our weather here.
I like that. I may steal that one from you. Okay, well, here comes another crop. Everybody knows what a kiwi fruit is. It's a brown fuzzy thing, green on the inside, from New Zealand. You know about other kinds of kiwi. Will you talk a little bit about the kiwi world and what's out there, and some of the things you guys have learned as you've tried some things here in Nacogdoches and other places?
Yeah, so go for the gold. That's what everyone's interested in, the golden kiwi fruit. Different species. That's what I did my doctoral research on. And I think between us, Dr. Creech and I have around 15, 20 gold and about 30 green cultivars that we're looking at. It's a vine, large vine. Think wisteria. Okay, it doesn't climb via twining tendrils like a grapevine. It just wraps around. So very, very, very large plant. It's like a wisteria on steroids, where it's happy, that is. It is deciduous, loses its leaves. But I mentioned it's got to be where it's happy. It does like acidic soil. So it's not quite a blueberry, but it is more like a muscadine in the sense that it does need soil that's below 7, well-drained soil. So it loves East Texas in that respect. Needs good quality water. So water with high sodium is not a good thing for it. The biggest challenge to kiwi fruit, though, from what we found is actually, and I was actually just going to mention when you're talking about, these freezes that really don't come with a lot of hardening off. Kiwi fruit, when they're young especially, are extremely susceptible to fall freezes. I mean, and what's interesting is you can have a young plant can get frozen. 27 degrees will kill it to the ground if it's a young plant in November, whereas you can have, and I've seen this personally, an older mature plant can take, 6 degrees Fahrenheit, even below 0 sometimes, if it's later in the winter when it's fully dormant and it's an older plant.
So by older, you mean like 5 years or what?
That's something we've been talking about, kind of going back and forth, but at least 3, probably 4 or 5 ideally, but I would say somewhere around there, 3 to 5 years. Once it can achieve that size, and of course it's got to have that permanent structure, it does fruit on that previous year's wood. Once you get that permanent structure, it seems like, I got to be careful what I say here, give false hope, but it seems like you're I don't want to say home free, but it's much, much more cold hardy if you can just get it past those first 3 or 4 years.
There is something called the hardy kiwi, Actinidia arguta, or is that it? But they're a little small, they're slick, and it's just a different monster. But it also doesn't just get real happy about being here.
Yeah. That's an interesting one, and of course, if you ever go to the store and find them there in kind of early fall, man, they're expensive and they're tasty little critters. And as the name would suggest, they're very cold hardy, but they cannot stand the heat. We have, or I should say had, about 25 varieties at our research farm, and we just got finished a couple weeks ago putting a light shade cloth over them.
Okay.
And we've already lost some from the heat. I mean, they don't like the heat, and ironically, we've had them killed by the fall freezes just because they weren't acclimated.
They weren't ready.
So
and
even
would
those,
that be? I think Actinidia colomicta, is that another one of the hardy?
Yeah, it's another species. And the only one that I'm familiar with that you really see commercially is the it's the variegated one, Arctic Beauty, I think is what they call it.
Yeah.
More an ornamental. We had a few colomicta, and they died the first summer we had them.
Okay.
But maybe under a shade tree, some light shade, especially afternoon shade. They don't seem to be as picky about soil pH either as the green or the gold species.
Okay. Well, the golden, you actually gave me some of those to try, and they're really good. So tell our listeners a little bit about the difference between the standard kiwi, again, fuzzy brown, green on the inside, and then the golden kiwi when it comes to flavor or taste or what you do and don't eat on the fruit.
So the golden kiwi fruit it's obviously the name would suggest they're generally more of a yellow color. Sometimes they're more of a greenish yellow, whereas the green kiwi fruit or fuzzy kiwi fruit obviously is green. The fuzzy kiwi fruit also has these really huge, as you know, these really long trichomes. So it's kind of like imagine biting into something with Velcro or the cover of a tennis ball.
There you go.
I don't mind it too much. I know my colleague Monty Nesbitt loves the skin. In fact, when I would peel mine, he would eat just the skin straight. But most people don't elect to eat the skin. Whereas on the golden kiwi fruit, it's not. It has very little fuzz or none at all. And so generally about half the people are okay with eating the skin. As far as flavor, the gold just it tends to have a more complex flavor profile, more tropical tasting. It's not just your sugar and acid. And of course, they're loaded with antioxidants and other phytochemicals. Very, very healthy too.
Seems like what we need for these golden kiwis is, rather than getting them right up on a trellis, is just sort of have something that goes up a post and just kind of cascades over, umbrella-like,
Almost like you do with the dragon fruit or something.
Yeah, or like a weeping redbud kind of thing. And then you would just get arches of PVC dome, cover it, put a little warmth underneath it, get you through the first few years, and then cut it back and then go to the trellis. I wonder if that would work.
Well, you mentioned that we actually put in, and I know some of the plants are still alive, a year or two ago, we put in a trial with Cooper Farms in Fairfield under, we'll call it a high tunnel, basically a old tomato greenhouse where it could be covered. But we had some issues with getting them established because this was actually last summer. Of course, not a good time to try to establish a plant.
Yeah.
But yeah, there may be some potential there with that.
Well, that's all really interesting. Well, we've covered a lot of strange kinds of fruit and things. Those of you listening, if you go online to Aggie Horticulture website, it's aggie-horticulture.tamu.edu. There's a section on fruit, and there is a publication for everything you can imagine, and then there's a publication on how to grow avocados in there. And I think you guys are starting the process of going back through those and saying, how do we update it? What new varieties or changes might be needed. Will you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that's one of our summer assignments is to get these updated. They were done before my time. I want to say in 2015, maybe some in 2012. And so updating them with, new pest issues, maybe new varieties that show promise. So we're in the process of doing that. Should be done hopefully by the end of this calendar year, but also adding some new ones. So, for example, I'm writing a new one on apricot, kiwi fruit, and pineapple guava, and so just trying to get some. I think even elderberry. Someone's doing one on elderberry even. So
I've heard about those a lot. I've never grown elderberries before, and all I know is it's just this, almost like a perennial thing coming up out of the ground, straight up out of the ground, and I see them in wet areas like banks of a creek or something like that.
I know the place I live at right now, which backs up to the Brazos River, there's some growing down there.
Are you going to tell me that there's 70 plus varieties of elderberry somewhere?
There may be. I know the USDA repository has a lot.
Oh my gosh!
So
this is just okay. That's funny. Well, yeah, elderberries. Elderberry wine. I mean, I guess you make a lot of stuff out of the juice.
Oh yeah, jellies and all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
Well, that is cool. I think that's really helpful to have that kind of stuff. Agri-horticulture is loaded with lots of vegetable resources for the home gardener and lots of fruit resources and nut resources for the home gardener, and it's just a wealth of information. Really, really, really useful. So tell me a little bit about statewide. What kind of fruit things are going on? I know Russ Wallace up in the High Plains. Is he still working with strawberries up there?
Still doing good strawberry work.
Lubbock area.
In low tunnels and high tunnels of protected culture production, and has had some really good success with that. Identifying varieties that are very well adapted, especially some of the newer varieties. Done a lot of good work with that. As I mentioned earlier, the pomegranate research is, I think, to my understanding, it's pretty well wrapped up. J.C. Lewis in Fredericksburg is doing some really interesting work with raspberry, and we're talking about Rubus idaeus, the real red raspberry, not like the Dorman red or Mysore raspberry. She's actually got a few gold cultivars she's looking at.
Oh wow, that's a surprise. When I was in Missouri, you could grow 100 red raspberries compared to a few gold and very few purple or black caps. They just didn't do well. I would think coming this far south, I'm surprised.
Well, and I think we're all amazed and really excited about it. And just like with the so-called hardy kiwi fruit, the issue with raspberry is it just does not take our heat here. Doesn't seem to be so much a chilling issue, but more the heat. And so what they're doing is they're trialing these under 50% shade. They're looking at different color. Of course, red, white, black shade is gonna end up manipulating the wavelength, or we would say the quality of the light, and that's going to have impact on things like shoot internode and all kinds of stuff like internode length and all of that. But what she's found is that 50% shade works pretty well, and she's identified about a half a dozen varieties that seem to work pretty well.
Okay, and these are what we call primocane bearing. See, normally for those of you listening, with blackberries and raspberries, the cane grows 1 year as a primocane, and then the second year it fruits as a floricane, and then it dies. But now with blackberries and now raspberries, we have the primocane bearing. So the same year it grows, it fruits toward the end of the season.
Yeah, and I think with raspberries, they usually refer to them as ever-bearing. But yeah, it's exactly the same thing, primocane fruiting. And so what they have elected to do is actually removing the floricanes, so getting rid of that early crop, that main crop, letting them start over with all new primocanes, and then harvesting later in the summer. That's what they've actually done.
That's interesting. I worked with a grower when I was in Missouri working with fruit, and they were doing the shade covering over Heritage, which is a red raspberry.
Oh, yeah.
It used to be an old standard. I think you guys are probably coming up with much better choices for Texas in the work in Fredericksburg. But anyway, we were trying mowing the whole thing to the ground, and so that it was only primocanes coming up, and then he had the shade cloth on them. And they were fruiting at a certain node number, and I can't remember what it was, the primocane. And so they would come in and they would hedge the top at decent height to force side branches to delay the fruiting a little bit later.
Interesting.
To spread it out.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Kind of interesting stuff. Well, so I talked about the high plains, the Lubbock area, and Russ Wallace, and then in Fredericksburg. Tell our listeners a little bit. We got about 2 minutes here. Tell our listeners a little bit about some of the things that are going on fruit-wise. And I know viticulture and grapes is a whole nother world, so I'll have to get Justin or somebody in here on Fran or somebody in here on that one. But tell us just about the fruit things that are being looked at in Fredericksburg.
Yeah, I know they've still got Jim Comas and J.C. Lewis. They're doing some cool stuff with other crops. They've got a lot of pears they're looking at, pear varieties. Of course, they've been looking at figs there for a long time. Like I said, pomegranates are pretty well wrapped up. And then I know, other parts of the state, Stephen Yannick, my colleague down in kind of the southeastern part of the state, Colorado County, he's doing a lot of cool work with growers, really trying to support the olive industry down there.
Yes.
And they've learned a lot with respect to yield and cold hardiness for some of these varieties. Of course, the last couple of years have been really tough on olives when as far as cold.
I know they weren't ready for that. I think there may be something somewhat similar to what you're saying on kiwi, is where as the plant gets established, it's a little hardier than when it was young. Is that true?
Yeah, it seems to be able to more thermal mass, and just seems to. The other thing is, it's going to have an older root system that can come back at least from a freeze more easily too.
Yeah, that's great. Well, there's a lot of exciting things going on in the Aggie Horticulture Department and Extension Horticulture across the state. And Tim, it's been wonderful having you come in here. We've been talking with Tim Hartmann, Assistant Professor, Extension Fruit Specialist with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Horticulture. And I could keep going, but we're out of time. So thank you so much for coming in.
Yeah,
really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. Well, I just want to remind you that you can listen to past shows on the KAMU FM website or by podcast. So if you have a friend who would have really loved to hear this, but they didn't get to, that's how they can go in and they can listen to a past show. Thank you for being a listener. We look forward to talking to you every Thursday from 12 to 1.
You've been listening to Garden Success with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension horticulturist Skip Richter. Join us again next week as Skip discusses your questions about gardening and landscaping in the Brazos Valley.